Yeah. Imagine a line of 32 hours going 6 foot apart.
Over there, be better for us.
Where's the one say? Well, you know what? He didn't get working right. That's why we gave him copies. He's gonna work off.
Oh, it is? Okay. Okay. All right, folks, it's 2 o'clock. Let's get the workshop started. And on the agenda is the CDBG DR grant program. We got Mr. Carl here going to make a presentation for us, and he assures us we're going to get plenty of money.
That's right, Mayor.
Carl, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor, and it's great to be with the Town Council and the administration. We're here today for the public meeting for the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery. That's a mouthful. That's the acronym is CDBG-DR, and it's a funding program that Congress appropriates when you have a disaster. So if you don't have a disaster, they don't have funding for this program. And this public meeting is for the Hurricane Michael that occurred in 2018. So some of y'all might be thinking, it sure did take a long time to get this money. And you'll be happy to know that it's part of that process. So this Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery is funding that is the last funding to cover unmet needs in a disaster. So before the CDBG-DR, you had your insurance company, right? For both homeowners and commercial, and for the city, you had another federal agency called FEMA, a Federal Emergency Management Agency, that came in and did some disaster assistance under the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, Flood Mitigation Assistance Program. There was a Small Business Administration that sometimes offers funding to small businesses. EPA can sometimes help out with some environmental sewer work. And then of course, Department of Transportation sometimes helps with roads. So you get through all of that money, and CDBG comes in under HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and they then implement what has been unmet, what has not been allocated to fix an unmet need. So today, what we're going to do is talk about a little bit about the CDBG-DR, and talk a little bit about Florida DEO. So Florida DEO is the direct recipient of the Community Development Block Grant funds. And they in turn go out and issue a grant notification to eligible entities, and we call Port St. Joe a sub-recipient, possibly, so that you can put in place some of these improvements or fixes to the damage caused from Hurricane Michael. So Florida DEO is the grant administrator. They are overseen by HUD. And so HUD's role will be to approve the state's action plan. We'll talk about that timing of such. So the state had to put together a plan that was based upon what happened in this area, in Bay County, in Gulf County, in some other nearby counties, and then determine how they were going to allocate the money that came from Congress and the administration, the president signed off on. There's $735 million that were allocated for Hurricane Michael. And today we're talking about the infrastructure program only, which is about 222 million, of which 111 are being competed for this round, which means that there'll be a second round of 111 million for infrastructure coming up. And so we'll see how we do the first round. If we don't make it on both of them, both projects we'll talk about, we'll come back to the second round. Okay. So the two projects, so that we get right to it, that the city is pursuing funding. And of course, working with Ms. Charlotte, Mr. Jim, we've done the public notice in the local newspaper, and it's also been on the city website. And we did it in Spanish and English. Spanish was a little more cumbersome for us, but we did it. And so we were trying to cross all the T's and dot all the I's to make sure that we are compliant when we submit the grant applications for the two projects. So working with the city administration, we've had lots of conversations with Florida DEO to make sure that the projects that you all want to do are eligible by Florida DEO and HUD standards, and they said yes. So there are two. One are the sewer lines. Many of them are going to be, under this proposal, relined, and some will be replaced because they're, as you know, very old and clay. And then you've got 3 lift stations that are in bad shape. Some of them are past their useful life. All 3 of them that are being considered were damaged by Hurricane Michael, and you know that better than anybody else. And so there's funding there to replace and or rehabilitate these lift stations, which are so critical to moving that sewer water to the sewer plant. And then, of course, your public safety, which I characterize as your fire and police station, was adversely impacted, flooded out. And so you want to build a new public safety complex, perhaps a safe house as well, so that when there is a hurricane or perhaps other natural disaster, that you have a place to shelter in place and then begin critical operations post emergency. So that is in place. And of course, the city, working with the state legislature, has already received funding and acquired the land for that public safety complex. So you're in great shape there. And that is the second project. Note, I know the city plan for the public safety complex includes the city hall. The Community Development Block Grant nationwide does not permit funding of city administrative facilities. So that's something that you'll have to pursue another course of funding. But for the public safety and fire, it's good. That's what we're pursuing. So that kind of gives you the groundwork for what we're doing there. All right. So the second slide, if we can just take one more. All right. So under the CDBG-DR, there were areas, 5 areas that are typically looked at. And Florida DEO, through their action plan, through talking and having their public meetings with the community, really distilled down from those 5 that are listed on the slide to the last 3. Restoration of infrastructure, housing, and economic revitalization. The first 2 areas really kind of dovetail into the last 3, and they're not really described in the state's action plan. So the state action plan is really focused on restoration of infrastructure, housing, and economic revitalization. We're here just to talk about the applications for the restoration of infrastructure. There is a housing program, a voluntary housing buyout program that the city could pursue if it wanted to. It's not required. And then there's an economic revitalization program that provides for example, workforce training, assistance for facade improvements for small businesses, things of that nature. Again, the city is not under any obligation to pursue that. In many ways, the work that you're doing with sewer is really the baseline. It's the foundation for any economic revitalization. If you can't move that sewer water, you can't attract private sector and public sector investment. If they can't flush the toilet, then that's a problem, right? So that's why the restoration of infrastructure is so important towards economic revitalization. Okay, so then the next slide kind of summarizes where we were and where we are now. We all know what happened October 10, 2018, Hurricane Michael, landfall. I believe the center was right there by Mexico Beach. It really had a devastating effect on the area. It took a little bit, as we talked about, for Congress to get their act together. What's new? But again, we know that FEMA was on the ground and SBA was on the ground. Others were on the ground. December 2019, Congress appropriates $735 million for Hurricane Michael. And that then sends the signal to HUD to then create the Federal Register notice for, in this case, the state of Florida to implement the disaster recovery program. So in May of 2020, Florida DEO presents their action plan to HUD, and HUD then 45 days later says, okay, we like your action plan, June 26th, you're good to go. Now DEO create an application process for the three that we talked about. Well, that was issued on September 2nd, and they gave us until the end of this month to get our applications in. And so we are actively working with you all, working in partnership with Dewberry. It's done a great job for the city, been very helpful to the Ferguson Group to get this grant application going. And again, we're checking a box because this is a public meeting that we're going to summarize the minutes and document that we were all here on this day. Next slide, please. Okay, so what we see here is just an example of the damage that you know much more better than I. A dry pit that is part of the sanitary sewer system, and the electrical components were severely damaged. And this is just one example, I'm sure, of many systems that were adversely impacted. And of course, you all know that your commercial and residential areas were impacted. There was heavy inundation from storm surge. The Gulf of Mexico came upon Port St. Joe. And it's important, though, as part of the application, that we document and photograph those damages so that it presents a more compelling case as to why this city is deserving of this funding to make these repairs. So your two projects, as we talked about, are the fire and police station. Over there by Avenue A is the proposed location of the new fire and police station and safe house. The initial projections are for about a 24,000 square foot facility, and the cost estimate, a little bit less than $7 million. Those costs will come clearer as we advance the project, and of course, getting DEO funding would be very helpful in that regard. And then the sewer repair, the discussion there is with the three lift stations. We talked about 20th Street, Hodrick, and Clifford Sims. Those are the three. And the 20th is a total replacement. It was severely damaged. We'll explain a little bit more about that. I believe Clifford Sims is a complete replacement as well. And then Hodrick is a rehab. So that's what you're talking about with your lift stations. You've got a lot of sewer line that you want to reline, resin relining. And these folks at Dewberry, and you all know pretty well what those costs are because you've been doing this work for some time. So those costs are very, very strong, well understood, and supported by data. All right, so why do we need a fire and police station? Because the one that you had got flooded out and it's no longer usable. I know you've done some work to kind of get it back to speed. We'll certainly document that Band-Aid, if I'm going to use that word, but you really need a new facility, and that's perfectly good. So you've worked with the legislature to acquire 5.21 acres on Avenue A, and it will include the fire and the police departments. Concurrent with both of these projects, we need to do environmental work. The sewer is a nothing burger because there's not really much of an environmental impact when you got the sewer lines underneath the road, right? Nothing, no problem there. We'll need to do a little more work on the 5.21 acres. That's under what we call NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act. Whenever the federal government pays for or puts a shovel in the ground, that triggers NEPA. And under that NEPA, you probably have to do what's called an environmental assessment. You all have contracted with the Ferguson Group to do that. So that is in play now. You don't have to finish the NEPA, but for the application, we want to have enough information to be able to convey to DEL that we think things are going to be fine. So that's where I came in today, walking around and taking photographs and all that stuff of the Avenue A area. Okay. And on that slide, if we just, so for the record, in the green is where you want City Hall to be. That's not part of this application. And in the far right is where the public safety complex would be, fire and police. In between, because we've got new environmental laws and all this, is the stormwater management, so that when it rains, that water will collect, and hold, and renovate, and then discharge probably passively to surface water, ultimately to the Gulf of Mexico, nice and clean. Okay. Okay, so with the sewer, the need here is that we had the 20th Street lift station damaged by storm surge. It flooded equipment, left damage and residue and debris. Clifford Sims, pretty much the same. Hodrick, not as bad. And so what we note here is a couple things. One, these are all old facilities, but most importantly, they were damaged from Hurricane Michael. And that's the important point. So what is the goal? Working with Dewberry and the administration, we want to replace the 20th Street lift station with a single wet well, submersible pumps, elevated control panel for resiliency. You all know well too much in Florida. They're not going to let you just do it the same way. It has to be fixed up better. And you see, with the roofs on the houses now, they've got a lot of this aluminum, or I guess it's aluminum roofs because the shingles will fly everywhere. So you're creating more resiliency. And so the grant application specifies the types of activities that you are doing so that when something happens again, you're not going to have as much problems. So that's what this is about. So you want to document all of that. Submersible pumps, new control panel to eliminate confined space of a dry pit, extended service of the system. All of these are good approaches to ensuring that when the next hurricane hits, we hate to say that, but we might as well, we have to think worst case scenario so that we're okay in the future. Okay. And then, we're going to do a lot of relining, which is the right way to go about things. You've got some pipe that is, chock full of holes. They call that I&I. infiltration and inflow. And you all know that when it rains, your sewer plant gets overwhelmed. You got to hold the water too long. So then, you get all kinds of problems. We want to emphasize that. Sometimes in grant applications, you got to show your bad side. Why do I need the money? Because I got a lot of I&I. So relining those pipes with the resin is going to close that up and make the sewer collection pipes much more usable for years to come, and improve and reduce your costs. And maybe in turn, I presume your sewer is an enterprise fund, fee for service. Maybe your residents might see a reduction. Who knows? If your costs go down, maybe you pass it on to them. So this is a good thing. We are doing some videoing of the sewer lines. I just got the little thumb drive, and I'm sure they'll be clean before we do this relining, but all of that will be provided to DEO so that they know that this is a well thought out project. Okay, and this is a little hard to see, but as you know, the city kind of runs northwest, southeast along the Gulf. So the area of interest for the sewer lines to be relined and some of the sewer lines to be replaced are in the northwest. That area is coincident. You go back to HUD. You go back to HUD and the Community Development Block Grant. Mr. Jim has mentioned this many times. HUD is focused on low to moderate income housing. And so that's based upon family income. Collect census data, right? So your LMI is the Northwest. So you're in great shape. And so you're doing an area benefit. 51% of the population has to benefit. You overlay your LMI on your sewer rehab area, thumbs up. Now, there are some lift stations that are outside of that triangular area, I believe. I don't know the names of them where they're at, and you all help me out with that. That's okay. We have talked to DEO about that, and those lift stations are for the entire community. So even though it's outside that triangular area, that patched area, we're going to put in for those lift stations. And I think 2 of them are right on the board. There's one that's a little bit further down, I guess. So it's 20. 20. Right. Right. Perfect. So we know that 20th is very important. All right. Now, we know that we're going to rehab, this is the plan, 25,000 linear feet of 8-inch sewer pipe. That's a lot of pipe. A lot of pipe. So that'll be in what we call the cured in place process. It's kind of neat, they kind of sleeve it in there and pull back, and you've got a nice resin plastic type of thing that, you can make a boat out of that stuff, right? It's all good. And then about 4,000 square feet, linear feet are going to be replaced. You'll be bypassing the sewer when you do that. You'll be managing traffic. You'll be replacing some manholes, and you'll be digging up some sidewalk and road. So that's the sewer plan as we know it. And so this is the plan that we have in place. We're on target. We hope to be done before Thanksgiving so that everybody can enjoy their Thanksgiving and ship this off to Florida DEO and then await word. We'll also be continuing to do the environmental assessment for the 5.21 acre public safety building. So that'll drag a little bit longer. We'll have to have another public notice and public meeting for that because that's under the NEPA, which is a separate law. CDBG, HUD has their law, NEPA separate. So we'll have to do that again. So we'll come back down. For me, I get to come back down to Florida, right? Enjoy this nice weather, probably in February. Good. Very important for the public. There'll be opportunity for the public to offer comment, not just today, but continuing on. And of course, the comments should be directed to Ms. Charlotte Pierce at the information presented. That is our presentation for you.
Mr. Carl, your sign-in sheet is up here that you need people to sign.
We do need people to
Yes,
sign.
sir.
Yes, we do.
We'll open forth and board for questions. Carl, I noticed in your narrative on your slide, the need says 50-year-old sewer collection system. When you put that in the narrative, does that help us or hurt us? I would think it might be something they say, well, it's 50 years old anyway, what Michael do to it? So just a thought. The other thought I had was also, it wasn't mentioned, but it was mentioned in the local paper in Bay County. They were talking about the all the heavy equipment and debris hauler trucks that were going up and down the roads during the first 6 months at least. Of course, didn't help the roads, and we're not talking about roads here, but road sinking and old pipes and so forth doesn't help to have that all that heavy equipment going across there. So I didn't know if that would be a bullet point that possibly help our cause also.
Mayor's great thoughts. Very great thoughts. We'll certainly incorporate that.
Yeah. Okay. That was kind of what I scratched down. Anybody?
I've got a few questions I jotted down. When you referenced round one with 111 million in another round, you indicated if we were not successful in round one, we would be back in the hopper for round two. What if the city is successful in round one? Does that preclude you from applying in round two?
You know, that's a good question. I think that all applications have to be in by November 30th, unless they change their rules. So it'll be an exclusive club that gets in November 30th. You'll get that first allocation of funding. Then they'll revisit those other applications and make further decisions.
Okay.
I believe that, but I will double check that. But I've not seen any notification of a second round of applications opening up.
Okay. Also, I noticed that you said a city hall was not permitted. Would a meeting room like this, obviously we're not in city hall, would we be eligible to build a new meeting room and meeting space?
Yes, that is a public facility, and under the Community Development Block Grant, public facilities may be constructed. Yes.
I was thinking along the same lines as, you know, when you called it a safe room, really what we need is an emergency operations center, which the city can operate out of during a disaster like that. And I would agree 100% that can be built into that. Well, it doesn't have to be in the administration building.
Yeah, and another thing that we could think of if we have the room is, you know, we spent a lot of time at the Centennial Building. It turned into a massive distribution site, but it served well once the goods were unloaded, but it did not serve well trying to unload those goods. So with that in mind, I think we could benefit community-wide if the property permits it as far as space to look at and envision a very large area, and it may be tied into the emergency operations center. But we need a big warehouse, and it's designed for 18-wheelers that were coming on a daily basis from Florida Emergency Management. But it was extremely difficult where we had to unload the trucks and take them up several flights of stairs to get in the building. It would have been much smoother had it been a loading dock type place.
It's something to, we'll look into it. So again, with the CDBG-DR, if the funding is not spent on that. And the city's done a wonderful job. Tradition every year, CDBG comes up as a non-entitlement community, less than 50,000 population, county less than 200,000, so that you have to go to the direct recipient, the state of Florida, and they have the annual competition. And what you're describing is certainly eligible. Now the state defines how they want to prioritize the use of annual CDBG funds. And so part of that also is having a discussion with the state when they ask for comment. What should we spend CDBG money on? Warehouse, EOC, public meeting space. In fact, I think it's a fair statement. When we were working with the state on their action plan, they incorporated a lot of our thoughts. So it really was important that the city weigh in, because they really did move in our direction.
My last question was, on the map, I see the area in green that says future city hall site, and way over to the right, I see the fire and police station. Is that property we currently own? Is
Yes,
that part of the 5 acres?
Yes, that is the parcel. If you're going down Langston Drive at the corner of Avenue A and Langston Drive, that is the site potential for a new city hall complex at some point. That's not eligible. But trying to figure out the site where we could put a would take a right on Avenue A and would be down the other end of the 5 acre parcel. So this would still allow enough room for you to build a new city hall.
Okay, I just didn't realize we owned that far down Avenue A, all the way past Battles intersection.
It's narrow, but it's funny shape.
It's actually inside, part of it is inside the fenced in area. At some point, we'll have to talk with the Joe Company about moving the fence line back off of the city property, but just it actually goes inside.
Okay, that's what was confusing to me. What was the mindset on moving the fire and the police department down Avenue A and not utilizing what's already open and cleared in the corner there?
A couple of things. First being making sure you had an adequate space to build a new city hall at some point if you want to build it. And the others down, you've got good ingress and egress on the main road for the fire truck and the police department to get back off the Avenue.
Makes sense. That's all I had, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Brett? You got anything? You're good? Dave, you got any questions?
The only thing I'd ask, and it doesn't have to do with CDBG DRs, which, just so y'all know, this opportunity only happens when we got screwed by a storm. So there's not much to cap on what we can ask for. So this is kind of, we've been talking about the gorilla in the room is going to be sewer rehab. This is our opportunity to make it right. So work very hard. It's very important. But my other question, outside of CDBGR, how does the BRIC program interface with this at all? And would they be the place that we look to move City Hall?
Yeah, so BRIC, Building Resilient Communities, is the new name. Every time you get a change in administration, they change things, right? So BRIC is the new Pre-Hazard Mitigation Planning Program. And how does it fit in? It's not restricted. The BRIC is not restricted. So that's an annual program.
Would BRIC like to see this approved? And then maybe they would be more likely to give money for City Hall since we've got our project half complete.
I think so. I think that's a reasonable supposition, because a lot of grant issuing agencies like to build off of the success of others. And particularly if you've done a good job of managing grant funds and you've got a plan in place, there's what happens is you all do all the work, Newbury does all the work, and then some congressman or senator comes in and it makes the announcement, and they get that big old scissors and cut it, and we got you that money. Yes.
But just so I'm clear, and tell me if I'm wrong, the reason for going with BRIC rather than the hazard mitigation grants or CDBG is because it takes a disaster for it to be turned on. It's not a perpetual thing, the DRs. But now this is going to be funded every year by Congress, and you don't have to have a Congress meet after a disaster to give money. It's going to be there already based on what they feel the storm damage is going to be in the following year.
The BRIC is an annual competition.
So it's not a longer process, it's a shorter process than what we're used to.
The CDBG, as you described, DR is, you got to have a natural disaster declaration by FEMA, by the way, and then that triggers ultimately all this stuff. That CDBG is like the vacuum cleaner, picks up everything that's left behind.
13 months later.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, their only excuse is everybody else was working ahead of them. So.
All right. Question, anybody? Not, Carl, thank you for coming down, presenting that. Thank you for working with our people. And we look forward to some exciting things coming down. I didn't hear this question asked. When will the application, when will the grants be awarded?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have a good answer for that because that's more of a DEO decision. I can't imagine they're going to take more than 2 or 3 months. I think somewhere January, February timeframe, you should know.
You should know, and then you got to wait to get your money.
You do have to wait. You've got to enter into, and that's where there becomes another lift, so to speak. You got to get into those contract terms and conditions for the grant. You'll have a grant project officer assigned, and then the good news is you're getting the money. The other news is you got to comply with all the federal laws and regulations, right? The Davis-Bacon and the Buy America, and you've got to do your quarterly reports and draws, reimbursements and things like that. And I know that the city has done that before. We're glad to help you as well. There is a line for helping with administration, making sure that the terms and conditions are appropriate for what you want.
The thing is, this is highly competitive too. Just looking on the news, you see where some people are asking for $60–70 million. There's only 111 in this first pot. The second one's another 111. But if you look at some of these asks, there's talk to local representatives and talk it up as much as you can.
Bay County's going to eat 80% of this.
We just get our fair share. We're not, our ask we thought was in line with an appropriate amount. I've seen some that were just astronomical. So we're not trying to get too much. We just need our fair share.
Well, and to your point, the most impacted counties were Gulf and Bay. That's where the bulk of the money has to be spent. So, to your point, you really need to make sure that Gulf County is pushing for their fair share.
What is the comparison of population in regards to the 60+ million of Bay County in comparison to our population and the amount that we're asking for? I think that'd be the first thing I did if I was on the committee.
The amount per capita?
Sure, yeah, sure. It's easy to say that Bay County's asking for almost 70 million.
Divided by 200,000 people.
Yeah, if you look at it, I think that we should do a little bit of analysis of that. And then you can say that we're in line with the population and the amount of damage that was sustained.
I heard Mariana's looking at a very similar type grants. From what I heard on the news, they were looking at 2 of the same ones, sewer rehab and looking at a fire/police. And I think they're asking for something in the neighborhood of 40 million. So you kind of see where at the end of the day, I'm hoping DEO will look at us and say, we're going to get a portion to our
Well, Chief wanted a boat and a helicopter. Throw that in there.
Still, I have helicopter. All right, anything else? All right, we'll adjourn the workshop. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Barry. Appreciate all your Big truck.